Well, let's try this for the third time. Third time's a charm, right? I've been trying to record this tutorial, and for some reason my audio has not been being picked up. I think I've got that solved now. If you're watching this, it means I got it solved. So as you can see, I've got a plaque here in the designer, and this is what I'm going to be showing you how to make. They're fairly simple in all honesty, but sometimes simple things can be difficult if you're just not sure what you're doing. So hopefully after you've watched this, you'll be able to make lots of them and make lots of money from selling them. So first thing we do, before actually we get into it, one more disclaimer or two. I don't have a standard layout on my toolbars. I realize this, and I was going to switch to a standard layout before I recorded the tutorials, and I honestly don't know what the standard layout looks like anymore. I've been using this for so long. I do have several paid add-ons to the software. I don't believe anything I'm showing you tonight will be using any paid add-ons, so you should be able to do everything I do, even if you just have the basic designer. However, the buttons I click may not be in the same place. So pay attention to what the buttons look like. I'll also try to say the name of the tools as I'm doing it, because most of these tools, if you don't have the button, you can go up to tools and use the menu to get to the things I'm doing. The other part of this is my favorites are gone. I was cleaning up my hard drive earlier and I moved them. I do still have them all saved on a backup. I just have not taken the time to restore that yet. So instead of the typical decorations that I would add, I've just got some generic corner filigrees, and that's what I'm going to use again in the next one that I'm about to show you how to do. Typically, instead of corner filigrees, I would put on one side or the other, or down in one corner, or both corners, or in all four corners, some kind of specific design element. The two most common is a pair of linked hearts and a pair of linked rings. Following that, the next most common is Army insignia or Navy insignia, or any military insignia, whatever their service and rank is, I would put that in. And then for the sportsmen and outdoorsmen or ladies, I have some nice bucks. It's a buck and a doe actually that form a heart. I will use that. I've got a pair of horseshoes that some people really like. There's tons of different decorative elements you can do. The cross is a big one, as is a treble clef or a pair of eighth notes. With the music I have, the pair of eighth notes, they have little hearts on the notes. So that's popular with anyone who's really into music. You can go all out. Sometimes I just do little decorative swirls, and it's not anything specific. So really, that's something that you should build up a library of elements that you've either made or purchased or downloaded for free, and you can incorporate into signs like this. And then you can show off online, either on your Facebook page or on a website, or you can print up pictures if you're not online with your business. If you're doing like flea markets or craft shows, you can have print up photos of actual carvings, or printed, like take this right here, and you can do a print screen through your computer and then print that graphic image so that you can compile a binder of, these are the various options you have. And that will do a lot for your business to give your customers an idea of what you've already done. Because when I tell people I can literally do anything you want, they look at me clueless. And then I say, well, were you in the military? Do you like music? Is religion a big part of your life? Are you an avid hunter? Things like that. And I start giving them suggestions and showing them stuff I've done for other people. Then the light turns on. You can see the look in their eyes just open up, and they're like, oh, yes, I would love that. But they need to be given some guidance most of the time. It's rare that a customer comes in knowing exactly what they want. So something like that will do a lot to help you not only satisfy your customer, but to get those customers. Because if they don't know what they want, they're not going to place an order. So if you're out trying to drum up business at those flea markets and craft fairs, or even just someone you meet on the street or at your place of work, if you have something you can show them, whether it's pictures on your phone or a small little binder of note cards or something like that, it'll go a long way to helping you make sales. Oh, I wasn't intending to go through all that. I didn't go through half of that on the others, so hopefully the audio is recording on this one. Now let's start a new board. Now I go with 8 by 24 as my default proportions on these plaques. Depending on the names and design elements requested, or if the customer requests a specific size because they know where they're going to put it, that can change. I've had minor variances from like a 7 by 25 to major variances. I had someone want a huge one that I had to do in 3 separate carves. But generally 8 by 24 is what I do. Because of that, I want the board and designer to be slightly oversized. So I go 9 by 25, as you can see, 25 length, 9-inch width. I also do a 0.74 thickness. This is because I use 1 by material. I'll usually glue up 1 by 4s or a couple 1 by 6s, or I might just get a 1 by 10. But regardless, it's 1 by material. And even though 1 by material is theoretically 3/4 of an inch or 0.75 inches, I've had it anywhere from 0.742 all the way up to 0.77. And if designer is thicker than the actual board at the machine, I've had a lot of issues. If designer is thinner than the actual board at the machine, I've never had an issue. It will tell me, thickness doesn't match, do you want to cut the depth or is it in a jig, whatever. But I'll just say cut the full depth and I don't have a problem. So I always go with 0.74 because as of yet, I've never had a board that was thinner than 0.74 when I bought 1 by material. So here's our new project. Excuse me, coughing. I'm in my 3rd iteration of recording this, and my throat's getting kind of sore. Okay, first step, actually second step. First step is setting up the board. We just did that. Second step is to get our project size. Like I said, I want 24 inches wide by 8 inches tall. So I'll make a rectangle to those dimensions. I'm going to center that on both axes. I'm going to make a cutout. Now on this cutout, I use the 1/8 inch cutting bit. That's the default. I have others, but it works well for these, so I leave it alone. I don't need a minimum number of tabs. We're going to have plenty, as you see in a minute. I leave the tab spacing at 3 tabs per foot. There is a reason for this. The reason is we've got 24, 48, 56, 64 inches of total perimeter. So on those 64 inches, 60 inches is 5 feet. 5 times 3 is 15. The 4 inches is 1/3 of a foot. That gives you one more 16. That means I'm going to have 6 tabs top and bottom, 2 tabs left and right. Now, occasionally designer will be a little weird about this because it's never perfect placement, and I'll have 5 tabs on the top and 4 tabs on this side or something like that. But generally speaking, you're looking at 6, 6, 2, and 2. And it works out well. I go with a 1/8 inch tab height because on the 16th inch, you're at risk of it just breaking free. On the 3/16 and 1/4 inch, it'll definitely hold, but it's a little bit more difficult to cut and sand flush. And I mean, it's not overly difficult, but it's a little more extra work. And the 1/8 inch holds perfectly for me. I've never had an issue with it with this number of tabs. And it's really simple to cut through with just a typical craft knife. And then when I'm sanding it, it's super easy to get it completely perfectly flat. So I leave it at 1/8 inch. We don't need to do an inset. I do put a maximum pass depth of 1/4 inch. That means it's going to do 3 passes on the cutout. I have missed this before and not put a pass depth. My machine is set to have I think it's a 3/8 inch pass depth, 0.375, and on that it'll just do 2 passes, and I've never broken a bit with that. but I prefer to be a little bit safer and go with the 1/4 inch. I do want to flip it to the outside of these lines, and I prefer to hide it. You don't have to. It doesn't affect anything, but I just like that. Now, if you notice here, I have a 1/2 inch top and bottom, and then I'm going to have an extra 1/2 inch on left and right. I still put this in a jig, but which gives me the extra 3.5, which is a total of 4 inches left and right, and it'll give me another inch on either side. But I like having that little safety margin in the board I'm cutting. So we'll hide that cutout and move on. That is what I designed the board in Designer. And next we will need our background. Now, I go anywhere from 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch, 1.5 inches. It really depends on the overall design being requested. But my generic default, just like the generic default is 8 inches by 24 inches, my generic default for a border is 1 inch. So 24 minus an inch on either side, that's 22 inches wide. And 8 inches minus an inch on either side is 6 inches tall. Again, we're going to center this in both directions on both axes. And we're going to make it a carve region that's 0.3 inches deep. There's really no reason for that. It's just my experience has taught me that I like that. That's it. There's no mathematical reason to go 0.3. I do like some texture back there. This weathered wood texture material is my favorite. Let me show this again. It's this button here, which is select material. And I like the weathered wood. Okay. But it's way too busy if you leave it at full height. So I'm going to take it down to about a 24% height. Now, if I turn off the wood grain, you can see that a little bit better here. So you can see there's texture back there, but it's not overwhelming. It's not going to overpower the rest of the plaque. It just gives you a little bit of eye candy, I guess. So we've got the border and the background established. Next, we need text. So, excuse me again. The last name, I went with Smith on the other one. Let's go with Jones on this one. For the last name, I use a font called Copperplate Gothic Bold. This is not, I don't believe this is a standard font with Windows or Mac, but I'm 90% certain it is freely available online. If not, any thick font with a slight serif. I don't like a total sans serif font, but I don't like a heavy serif font. Like this is sans serif. You can see there's absolutely no decorations on the ends of the letters. And this would be, well here, Courier. This is kind of a heavy serif. You see it's got heavy decorations on the end. Copperplate just has very light decorations on the ends of the letters. It's a bold font, and to me it just looks really good. In addition to using the bold font, I make it bold, which has already been selected here. And you can afterwards use these sizing controls to adjust the exact size, and I probably still will. But I like to get it as close as possible with this font size. So I'm going to guess, depending on how long the name is, anywhere from 240 up to about 400 point font. I'm going to guess this is about a 360 to look good, and that does look about right to me. We're taking up just about the right amount of board real estate there. Sometimes I will play with the spacing between letters, but this spacing looks perfect. And the spacing between lines is completely irrelevant because we only have one line. So I'll say OK. Oh, and it was raster. It was raster mode. We're going to center this horizontally, and we're going to drag it down so that it's got about twice as much space below as it does above. And this is one of those times where I'm going to misuse the term OCD, because I'm honestly not OCD about anything, because that's a mental disorder and it doesn't cause me that kind of stress. But I have a quirk where I really get pedantic or particular about aligning things to a grid. Sometimes it even makes it look worse. I know eyeballing it or freehanding it can sometimes make things look much better, but I really love to use grids. It's just my little quirk. So I'm going to change this to a 25. Here, actually, let me go back. I turned on the grid and I turned on snap to grid. I'm sorry if I'm going too fast again. This is the third time I've done this tonight. Then I went to layout and I clicked snap and I changed it to a 1/4 inch interval. Then I said OK, and that gives me a 1/4 inch grid, and this is going to snap either on the top line or this bottom line. It will snap on those grid lines. It'll also snap at the half line. So even though it's a 1/4 inch grid, it actually gives me 1/8 inch maneuverability. So between being able to snap the top line or the bottom line, I can also snap them to the 1/8 inch marks that are, you can't see, but you can tell when it's halfway between them. So it gives me a huge amount of maneuverability. So if we count here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 2 inches below. And realistically, it goes up quite a bit above this bottom line. So we got 2 inches and probably 1/8 below it. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A little bit less than 5, but realistically, again, the actual font goes below this line. So we've got over 5. So 1.25 inches and 2 1/8. That's pretty good layout in my opinion. So I'm going to leave that right there. I'm going to turn off those grid lines because they can get distracting. And yes, I like that. And I believe I've done this 3 times. Yes, I centered it horizontally. I couldn't remember if I did that this video or not. Okay, moving on. Next we need first names. So we will do Jeff and Tammy. Again, this is not for any specific customer. I'm just picking random names that I have done in the past. So I didn't want to do John and Jane Smith again. That was boring. Okay, for the first names, I have another font which is non-standard, but again, I'm fairly certain is freely available online. This is called Actuelle, A-K-T-U-E-L-L-E, Actuelle. It's a script type font. It carves really well from small to large sizes. It works. So I would recommend, if you don't have it, which most of you probably won't, you go out and find it. Now on the width, I like the first letter of the first name to overlap slightly the first letter of the last name. Same thing, I like the last letter of the first names to overlap the last letter of the last name. So we're going to make this, I'm going to guess about a 200. That looks good because I'm going to actually add some spacing here. We're also going to add this spacing. Now if you can tell, like I said, it's a script font, so we've got overlaps on the letters. I want to space this out so that they're just barely overlapping. I don't want them quite as deeply embedded as that. So we're going to go up. I think it's probably going to end up being about a 5 here. Let's see. Let me go past that. 6, 7. Yeah, see, this O is starting to pull out of the F. That's not going to look pretty. So I think 5 it is. So yeah, and we've got the G overlapping the J. We've got the Y into the S. That looks good to me. So we'll say OK. Now if you notice, we haven't done anything with depths yet, so this doesn't look good. I forgot that last time I set the depth on the last name before moving on. So it defaults to a depth of 1/8 inch. We're going to put it at a 1/4 inch deep. And then the height, if we look at this, it's standing proud a decent amount, so I'm gonna drop it down just a little bit further from there. We'll go 90% height. Now the first names, I want to leave them at 1/8 inch, so that means we've got a 1/4 inch deep and a 1/8 inch deep. That's twice as high off the background. And I think, again, I'm gonna drop it down on the heights. I'm going to say about an 80. I might change that. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I want a little bit higher than that. Let's go 85. I know it's hard to see the distinctions here, but I've got enough experience at toying with these that I have a pretty good idea of where it's going to end up, and I like this. So we're going to go 85. Every time I do it, it's slightly different. So don't think that these numbers I'm using, the 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch, those I use every time. But the height, that 90 and that 85, those are different with every name. I just play with it until you find something you like the look of. That's really what it comes down to. Now, just like the last name, I wanted twice as much below as above. Well, I want the opposite here. I want twice as much above as below. So I'm going to turn on the grid, and I'm only going to look at the lowercase letters here. We're going to, before I forget, we're going to center it horizontally. And we're going to get it so that we have basically 1/2 inch plus a bit, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 inch plus a bit. So we've got twice as much space above as below. And again, this is not something you need to do mathematically precise every time. I eyeball it after I move it, or before I move it, or while I'm moving it, and make sure that I like the look of it. And in this case, I really do, because we've got on the E of Jones, we've got these letters not completely occluding that center bar, but they're not covering up the bottom either. So you don't mistake it as an F, and you can clearly see it's an E. I don't see anything that's really going to be an issue to carve except maybe this A where it's dipping off the N, and maybe the inside of this Y. But those are little things I can easily clean up with my Dremel, and I would have to anyway, and probably the inside of this F as well. But really, let's turn off those construction lines. Yeah, I'm liking the look of this. I think this will work well. So we will go back to the standard view, and we'll add our third set of text. This is going to be the established, and I'm just picking a random date here. Let's do something unusual. Let's go with February 3rd, 2003. Now, my preferred font for this, and all of these fonts can change. If a customer has a specific request, or if there's a reason that I would like a different font because of the other design elements. If it's more of a Western theme, I might make it, instead of a script, I might make it more of a Western first name and stuff like that. But these are kind of all of my default go-to fonts. If there's no reason to use something else, these are the ones I will be using. And I like this established date to be roughly the same width as the last name. And even though I did this off center, I can tell it's a little bit shy of that. So let's go up to about a 120, and I think that'll work. Oh no, that's way too big. So let's do about 100, because 96 was too small. I think that's about right. I'm going to add a little bit of spacing because the RU here is overlapping a bit. Most months I don't have that problem. Most months I don't use any extra spacing. But on this one, I'm going to add 1 or 2. There we go. I can see a little bit of separation there now. So that should carve a little more cleanly. And then I'm going to center this horizontally, and I think it's a little bit larger than that name, but not too much. So that's pretty good. And in fact, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make it 14.5. It was at 14.7. And I'm going to make the last name 14.5. I don't always do this. I just decided to for no specific reason right now. And that way they're the exact same width. And on horizontal positioning, we've got it centered. On the vertical positioning, I want it as close to halfway between the name and the border as I can. So again, when I say that, I'm basing it off the lowercase letters. I don't count the uppercase or the B that extends up or the Y that extends down. So we've got 1, 2, 3 and a bit. We've got one, I got half of 1, 1, 2, and another half of 1. So it's a little bit off. So let's go down there and see what that looks like. We've got 1, 2, 3 exactly, and then pretty close to 3 exactly. So that's pretty much dead on where I would want it. And again, that's kind of my quirk on trying to position stuff on the grid and get exact height above and below. You don't have to do that. You can certainly just eyeball it, put it where you think looks good, and it'll almost definitely come out looking great if you just use your best judgment. It's just a little quirk of mine. Now again, I would normally put design elements, but I don't have my favorites, so I'm just going to do that same corner filigree. We'll drop that in here, and it is, as you can see, extending below the halfway point, which I don't want, and it's not coming very far out this way. So I've got this lock turned off so that I can adjust each dimension separately. Now on the height, we have a total of 6 inches, and I don't want it to overlap or even touch. So I'm going to go 2 7/8, which is 2.875 inches. And then on the width, just because I did this a couple times before, I know that I'm liking the way it looks at 5 1/4 wide. That's something you could totally just play with and get whatever you want. Excuse me. And then I'm going to turn off the feather. I'm going to put this at the same depth as the background, which is 0.3 inches. And then let's rotate this out. I think that's a little too high. It's standing a little too far proud. So I'm going to put it at about a 50% height. And maybe a little bit higher than that. Let's go with a 60%. Yeah, there we go. I like that. So now that I've got that where I want it, I'm going to use my arrow keys to kind of micro position the height here. Actually here, let's just do this. See, this is giving me a measurement from the center line. I'm going to put it at 0. And then I'm going to remove the attachment. I use attachments to position things, but almost always I will immediately remove those attachments because they can cause problems. If, say, I put that at 0 and then I just decided I changed my mind and I want to come in and put it at 0.1, if I did that without removing it first, instead of moving it, it would actually shrink the height by 0.1. So that's one issue I have with attachments. Another issue I have with attachments is if I adjust, if I'm doing mirroring or if I adjust other elements, attachments can cause problems. So I will use attachments to move things, but then I immediately remove them. That's just my own personal foible, again, kind of like the grid. I'm going to try this at 1.5 inches and see if that overlaps with the edge. It doesn't look like it does. So I think that that is where I want this positioned. So since that's done, I'm going to mirror all, and we'll get this in all 4 corners. It looks like we are overlapping a little bit with the established, but I think that looks good. I think that'll carve well. So now we're going to select this, all 4 of these, and I'm going to put that at best bit optimization. That'll just make it carve as clean as possible. Now I'm going to select all 3 text layers, and again, this is something I almost forgot to do because this is the 3rd time I'm recording the video. I put a small draft, I make sure that there's no feather, and I will put best bit optimization. Now you probably aren't going to notice much of a difference here in the preview, but there is definitely a difference in the carving when you make those changes. So there we have it. We have, I think, 6 different layers here. We have the background, which is 0.3. We have the little corner filigrees, which are also at 0.3, but they're standing proud of that background. We have the last name, which is at 0.25, 1/4 inch. We have the, please forgive yet another mistake. I did not set the depth of the established. So we have established, I want this halfway between the last name and the first name. Now the last name's at 1/4, the first name's at 1/8. So halfway between 1/4 and 1/8 is 3/16. I know that that's 0.188, but just to show you how it's done if you're not familiar, we can type in 3/16 in the depth, and when I hit enter, it's going to change that to 0.188 for me. So we have the last name at 1/4 of an inch, and I put a 90 height on that. We have this at 3/16 inch, and I'm liking that at the full 100 height. Sometimes I would play with that, but I think that looks good. And then we have the name at a 1/8 inch, and we went with an 85% height on it. And then the sixth layer is the border, which is the surface of the wood. So once more to recap, we have 6 layers. We have background, corner, name, established, first name. And that's really all there is to it. I probably overcomplicated this trying to be extremely thorough. It's really not that hard. I think I've done this. I know the first tutorial I did with some extra talking was a total of 14 minutes. The second one was 19, and I'm sure this is going to be well over 20 because I've talked a lot more during this one. But it literally takes me between 10 and 20 minutes to design one of these signs. Now, when I upload it, I don't have my card in right now, but if I were to upload it, I will usually use best, not optimal. Optimal takes twice as long to carve, and on a sign of this nature, it's rare that you will notice any difference unless you're using specific wood types or you've got extremely detailed decorations, like some of the military insignia. I will use optimal, but the majority of the time I carve on best because you really cannot tell the difference in the carving, and it takes twice as long. So I will set the bit optimization to optimal, but when I upload the carve, I set the bit optimization to best, but when I upload the carve, I don't go with the absolute best, which is optimal. I go one step below, which is best. And that just saves me a lot of time, and it's just as good of a carve. I also do have a jig I carve these in. It's set up, it's basically just 2 1-inch rails that are adjustable as far as how long they are, with a 3.5-inch extension on either end. And that way I can accommodate any length and up to 12 inches of width on the board I'm carving, and I don't have to actually have the extra 3.5 to 4 inches on either side of this board when I'm loading it, because I usually use nice wood for these. I don't usually use just off-the-shelf pine or whatever. So that way it saves me a little extra wood. But when I started, I actually was using the extra wood on the boards, and I was using pine. I was just gluing up pine 1x4s or the select white woods at Home Depot and Lowe's. And you know what? It can come out really good as well. So I choose not to use it now, but there's really no reason why you can't, especially if you're just getting started. So that's it. I wish you well in making these. Hopefully you, if you didn't pick it up, hopefully you can play through this a second or third time and have all your questions answered. If not, feel free to contact me on Facebook. It's Kenneth Ross, or you can also reach me through Colorado Custom Carves on Facebook. And I'm in most of the Facebook groups. I'm on some Reddit groups, so please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.